Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the geographical area that we're speaking with this morning. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you, and I look really forward to some good questions as we go through. So Property Awareness Month, I think, is something really exciting. It's something that has been a wonderful career for many of us, and hopefully for some of you, if not all of you on the line, that have been in this career field for a while really feel that it's valuable, and those of you that are newcomers to it see that it really does provide a wonderful path going forward. So Skip and I would like to share with you today some, I would say, like 20,000-foot views of what a property system, kind of where we fit into the equation of all things, and how we can, what key skills really are essential for success in property management. Skip, can you move the slides, please? So first of all, one of the common things that asked is, what is it that you do when you say we're property management or a property manager or a property administrator? And invariably, the first thing they ask, oh, you manage land and buildings. Well, that's a possibility, but it's unlikely. Most of us typically deal with movable equipment, capital equipment, personal/tangible property, that type of arena. But one of the proverbial questions that's asked is, what is it that we do? So as we go through this, if you don't already have a 30-second description, some people may call it like an elevator speech or something to that effect, I would consider it, what is your professional introduction? To be able to very quickly explain and give a synopsis of what is it that you do within your scope. Another challenge we have is whether we're called property management or asset management, inventory control, etc., any of these titles listed on the slide, oftentimes the scope of what we do may vary from place to place. I would venture to say no two property jobs have exactly the same scope, and the purpose of your business or your organization may be very different. So keeping in mind what are the essential elements, the most mission critical activities that you do within your job is one thing to include in that brief description of what is it that you do, regardless of what your official work title may be. Next slide, please. So property management system, this can be viewed in several different ways. Oftentimes when the question is asked, what is your property management system, the first thing we tend to look at or think about is, what software application do we use as our database? Yes, that's one aspect of it. From today's perspective, we're thinking of a property management system as your overall asset, equipment, property management system. It includes various different components. Yes, your application is one. Data and what we do with the data is really the key to a lot of what we do, or one of the essential elements. But here we're looking at it as property management or asset management as a whole is looking at what is your core process. Without a process in place to manage your equipment or property, and I'll use those two terms pretty interchangeably here, we all need a system in place. It may be a small operation, so maybe your process is very simplistic. It may be a very large, complex organization, very decentralized, a lot of policies and procedures. You may be a government contractor, perhaps not. So the more complex your organization is, the more likely complex your property system is. Regardless, it is one of the core business processes within an organization. Everyone, regardless of size of business, has some property or some assets in order to conduct or perform business. It's both a financial as well as a stewardship responsibility. Financial, of course, from the appropriate use of funding, getting the appropriate approvals where necessary, making good business decisions, managing to budget, making sure expenses are allowable, etc. Stewardship from the perspective of everyday good practice, responsibility, ensuring that items are controlled, protected, maintained, preserved, making sure that they're utilized in the right manner. All of that falls into stewardship. A big component of stewardship, in my opinion, is the level of property awareness within your organization. Another way that all of the activities we're doing this month tie into helping us promote what a property management system is and what exists within your organization, and also why it is important to follow that process. Next slide. If anyone has questions, by the way, feel free to type them in the chat box anytime along the way, and we will get to your questions as they come through. There are many business environments in which there are property systems. As I've alluded to in the previous slide, we can be a small operation, we can be a very large complex, we can even be a worldwide global organization. But every single environment is going to have its nuances. And there is no organization that I'm aware of that has only one set of compliance requirements. So even if you're looking at your internal policies and procedures, typically they're based on some sort of external requirement: financial accountability, contractual liability, contractual compliance, etc. So there's always going to be a blend of what I call environments or compliance arenas that we have to work within. And this is where, from a property perspective, property profession perspective, we really look at what are the different points of view that we have to understand, what are the different compliance requirements, how can we meld all those into one system, and becoming subject matter experts, then people come to rely on us. We then become a more and more valued presence within the organization. So many different environments, each having their nuances, each having various different levels of risk in audit, each having different ways to communicate and different priorities. So managing that balance is part of what would be a really great skill in our tool set. Next slide. So to have a really effective property management system, we really believe it needs to have a robust structure. Again, robust doesn't necessarily mean complex. The complexity, I believe, comes into play the larger and the more varied your customer base, the more varied your type of assets, the larger your budget, etc. Robust, from my perspective, really looks at, are you covering all your bases? Do you have processes in place? Are you taking into consideration all the key risk management factors, the people, the training, the awareness, logistics? Do you have processes in place and procedures to follow, directions to follow? Do you physically handle assets in an appropriate manner? Your systems, your online databases, etc. Procedures and agreements, documents with which you must comply or follow that enable successful property management. Enabling property management means simple, precise, cut to the chase, eliminating extra steps wherever possible. Sometimes that is not, but wherever possible, so you can facilitate compliance. That is the bottom line, whether it's internal compliance or external compliance. And the balancing of compliance with your stewardship or everyday being good citizens, so to speak, will really oftentimes reflect very positively on how you manage the risk associated with loss, etc., of assets. So really having that robust structure in place is essential for a general property system. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite slides, actually. I think it really looks at, from a very, very generalized view, what is core to a property system. Breaking the asset life cycle down into three basic groups. You see in the gray boxes there, the front end of the system, requirements gathering and all the steps that happen there all the way to the point of actually acquiring or receiving the asset, physical custody. Various different steps there, different areas of expertise, different types of individuals involved in the various processes, and collecting information throughout all those steps that then form the baseline for your asset records. And the center box probably should be the largest of the boxes here, really. It is really the active portion of the asset's life cycle. All of the use, movement, inventory, maintenance, modification, etc., that happens during the life of that asset, and appropriately controlling it while still enabling it to be available for use as much as possible so you can maximize its useful life. Once it's no longer needed, then it starts into the excess process. So looking in a broad brush stroke on, I would say, pre and post acquisition, and then the actual active life cycle. The green, yellow, and red bars really indicate all the underlying activities that happen throughout the entire life cycle of that asset. Yes, we track. Yes, we inventory. Yes, we record. We identify. We may send it out for use at a subcontractor facility. All kinds of different movement that happens under that whole umbrella of quote-unquote tracking. Training and awareness, often overlooked, especially if your system is running smoothly. We tend to not focus as much as we should sometimes on ongoing training and awareness, particularly with all the changes in the use of technology, not only in how we do business, but the type of assets that we acquire. So all of that really is a continuous process. And then from a process management, metrics, performance assessment, etc., that's where you get into all of the reporting, reconciling, and making necessary adjustments. Adjustments, why? Things happen. Adjustments could be positive in the way that you're adding new records. It could be modifications. It could be deletions. It could be, hopefully, on a minimal basis, loss. But all of those are different types of adjustments. And then, of course, we have the checks and balances. The audit processes, both internal self-assessment, external compliance, depending on the environment you work in. Perhaps if you have secure or classified work, you may have very specialized reviews and assessments, but ultimately they're really there to protect all the parties involved and to confirm that what you say you're doing. And that's where our expertise comes in, is making sure we understand all of those nuances. And I think from here, Skip, were you going to take it from here?
Skip, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was going to go take it at the acquisition slide, Yvonne.
Okay. Yes, we had gone back and forth a couple times, so let me finish up this section. So the compliance playbook. Sometimes I look at this as the compliance umbrella, kind of our roadmap. It really is a not completely inclusive listing, but a listing of the majority of types of sources that we have to follow and understand and learn to interpret and apply, because we may need to comply with and follow rules and regulations and guidelines in any combination of these. Speaking for us here at Stanford University, where I'm headquartered, we have to comply with all of these regulations. So finding a way to meld the property system so that you have a common denominator across all of these requirements becomes really essential. And this is another area where the training and awareness comes into play, because as we become more and more subject matter experts, the better we are at interpreting and utilizing these documents as our guidelines to perform effectively what we need to do. And sometimes they contradict each other. So part of the challenge is being able to ferret out the information as to what really applies in what circumstance and who we go to make any clarifications or changes. One thing that's come up in the last few years and continues to be an area of focus is near the bottom of the list, actually. So these are not in any ranking order, by the way. VCS's, Voluntary Consensus Standards, as well as ILP's, Industry-Leading Practices. It is encouraged in probably all scenarios to at least consider what are best practices, sharing of what works efficiently, effectively, to enable business to be run smoothly, as well as comply with these requirements. So lots and lots of information out there for us to work with, lots of information to have to understand, and to be able to tease out the nuances. Next slide, please. So looking at things from a government contracting perspective, if you are an organization that does government contracting, and I believe pretty much everyone on the registered list for this event is to some degree, then one of the key things that we always work with is the FAR Clause 52-245-1. In a nutshell, it really provides us the broad spectrum of requirements for managing property. They call them business outcomes. You can think of these also as business processes. Ultimately, there are various steps and activities that occur from the beginning to the end of the life cycle. Years ago, they used to call them functional areas of property. In some cases, they still do. And there's always the question of whether are there 10 outcome areas or 15 or different numbers. Bottom line is the ones in the gray box: acquisition, receipt, etc., records, through contract closeout. Also embedded within those are the ones listed at the bottom: ID, storage, movement, disposal, management, and audits. Those have not disappeared. So in looking at the overall system that we referred to a moment ago, all of these different facets need to be addressed and included in everything that we do when we're looking at the overall property management system. Next slide, please. So where are we in terms of controls internally? A very important point for us to keep in mind is, what is the tone at the top? What is the mindset? What is the priority set within our organizations in terms of the importance and the need to follow property management rules? Oftentimes we're competing with many other organizations in terms of level of risk, exposure, etc. But part of our responsibility, and this is where property awareness really comes into play too, is being able to convey the message of the value added that we give to the organization. Have an understanding of what our controls are, and having a communication strategy set up. Who do we contact? Who do we inform? Who do we promote the not only the value but the services that we offer in terms of property management? And not forgetting to recognize individuals for their performance. Oftentimes we tend to say, you know, these are the areas of non-compliance, but sometimes recognizing comes first and then correction comes following that. It really sets the tone for a lot of what we do. But understanding what our controls are, which are our key controls, which are just administrative controls, lots of different facets to this. Bottom line is, what is the tone? What is the level of awareness? What is understanding within your organization of property management? Next slide. So I just mentioned the term key controls a moment ago. A key control is a non-negotiable, essential, required step in any of your processes. And I say any because it really is defined within each organization. What are your key controls? But think of these as, excuse me, steps in a process that have to occur. For example, a physical inventory event has to occur. An acquisition has to occur. Without acquisition, we don't have anything to worry about, right? So key controls. Those are just a couple of examples, knowing which ones they are so that they are very clear, very precise, that they are monitored, that they're regularly tested, and that we are looking at the error rate and the materiality of those types of errors. So a key control is really essential to identify within your policies and procedures. Not only that, but as a practitioner of property or a property administrator, a property assistant, a property clerk, whatever title you may have, knowing what those key controls are and knowing that they must occur and they must be complied with. On the other hand, they can also be changed. So part of it is understanding when is it necessary to adjust, append, improve, or redefine key controls. Point is, identify which ones they are, make sure they're at the top of your priority list in terms of awareness and monitoring for compliance. Next slide. So a huge portion of what we deal with is asset funding and acquisition. I would venture to say a lot of us aren't directly involved in the budgeting process, but from a property standpoint, it's essential that we understand what was the funding source for that asset. The funding source is often going to lead you directly to understanding who is the ownership, defining the ownership, and ownership is going to define what you can and cannot do with that asset. He who owns the property makes the rules, is my saying, and knowing not only who owns it, how is it apportioned, what approvals were put in place, was there shared funding, and what implications may that have, such as who makes decisions, what can it be used on, how and when can it be disposed, can it be modified, etc. So a lot of different implications boil down to the one essential element of knowing the source of funding for an asset. Very important. So as you go through the life of that asset, always maintain that piece of information on your asset record, regardless of what else changes. And making sure your data is correct. Data integrity, we do so much based on data, information. So much of what we do on a management basis or even administrative basis is based on data. So that accuracy is really important. Those checks and balances really tie in and help us along the way, not only from an accounting standpoint, but from managing every one of those business outcomes that you saw in the previous slides. Okay, Skip, I think now it's all yours.
Alrighty then, greetings across all the time zones of the country. Hope everybody is safe and warm, at least warm. Anyway. Methods of acquisition. Let's talk about, Yvonne talked about the asset life cycle. So there's 3 life cycles, right? Acquisition, utilization, disposition. Let's talk about acquisition. Acquisition is the foundation. It is the basis for the asset record. As a cycle, there are methods within acquisition for acquiring assets. They can be sponsored or furnished or loaned, purchased, new or used, reuse, reutilization, lease or rent. There's also gifts, donated, incoming transfers, title transfers, and transfers into an organization from another organization or another contract. Also considering under purchase, new or used, is also fabrication. Fabrications in-house can be considered contractor acquired, even if you are having an asset fabricated to some specifications by a subcontractor or a supplier, that is still contractor acquired. But the important part here is that in the method of acquisition, the detail of your asset record, the foundation of your asset record, the integrity of your asset record is where it begins. If you are not directly involved with the acquisition process, whatever you're using, you should at least understand and be familiar with how that process works. And remember, when we say process means that there are steps taken in this, in the method of the acquisition, in the method of utilization, in the method of disposition, and it's important to understand those process steps, each and every one of them. Records. They reflect the absolute integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness of your overall property management system. It is the heart of the property system. It is considered to be the official record. We're also, in records, most vulnerable to mistakes, errors, audit things. If we think about where audits or reviews, be they self-assessment or internal or external, the one area that we always start in is in records. And if we find in our records that there is some inaccuracies, then it brings attention to a particular area within the records, and then now that area within the records drills down to the process that created that record, and we're back to going to acquisition. Data integrity, security. The issue with most organizations in records is the consistent use of the data in a consistent manner. So if I will use the example of locations, if we are using consistent location schemes across our organization, then we are easily able to report assets at specific locations. If we're using different locations, if we're using the same locations differently, then the challenge there is we have assets in one location, but we're not able to report them entirely. We know we have to report separately. Self-assessment on records is probably the area to start with on a self-assessment program. We need to take a look at those records and validate those records on an ongoing basis to make sure that we are maintaining the integrity. And in maintaining the integrity, we're maintaining the efficiency of the system. Records retention and disposal. We are required to maintain records for some period of time, even at the end of a contract or the end of an activity or a grant or whatever the case may be. Something about records is that there should never be deletion of asset records in your system. There would be specific reasons that you would have to delete a record, and I'm not sure from an audit perspective that that reason would be acceptable as opposed to retiring that record. Notice I said retire, not delete, and put a reason or a justification for that retirement of that record. And that would go outside of the normal disposition action of an asset life cycle. It is data management. We maintain our records and as the heartbeat of our property management system, and in the maintaining those records, again, the consistency and maintenance of those records, and I can't emphasize enough the audit trail. Audit trail starts at acquisition, continues on through utilization, and through into disposition. The importance of the audit trail is maintaining the record of actions that occurred to an asset. So let me offer to you, if we break the audit trail, we're going to lose the asset. So back to acquisition, foundation of the asset record. Utilization. During the utilization, we're doing what? We're doing calibration, we're doing maintenance, we're doing location changes, we're doing administrative changes. Anytime we change something about an asset record, there should be what's called a posting reference. Answer the question, why? Why did we change this information? Why did we change this location? Why did we perform this calibration? Why did we change this serial number? Audit trail, audit trail, audit trail. Disposition at the end of the asset life cycle. Disposition starts with an asset becoming excess. Let's talk about excess for a second. Back at acquisition, we had a requirement to purchase, fabricate, or otherwise acquire an asset for some reason, some purpose. That's the requirement. Once that asset has fulfilled that requirement, it may be excess to performance. Let me offer here, we have two what I call categories of requirements. You either have a current requirement or you have a future requirement. And that future requirement could be on the same contract or grant or whatever the performance element is. I need it this week, I need it this month. This activity is going on for maybe a year. I do not need it right now. I'm going to need it again next year. That asset then has a future requirement, and we're going to put it in some storage method or some place that we can protect it, preserve it, and make it readily available when that requirement surfaces. In the absence of that requirement, the asset becomes excess to its original need. At that point, we want to make it available to other requirements that may exist so that we can reutilize that as opposed to purchasing or fabricating a new one. In the absence of any other requirement outside of the reason for which it was purchased, then the asset should be made should be declared surplus, and as a result of, we can have sales, we can disposition actions or disposal methods, surplus sales, recycle, donation, whatever the case may be. Many of us deal with the government, and in dealing with the government, we request disposition instructions on the government's property. And we wait for them to come back and tell us, okay, this is what we want you to do with it, transfer it here, ship it there, sell it, recycle it, whatever the case may be. As a result of that, then there is the final event or the retirement of the asset. The retirement of the asset is at the end of the life cycle. In your system, whatever that means to you, that retirement should be noted with how the asset was disposed of, when it was disposed of, and there's that posting reference again. We need to answer the question, why was it disposed and how was it disposed, and that's documented. There also may be financial adjustments involved, and if you're dealing with capital property, we have to coordinate with our accounting department in disposition of capital. That has to do with some financial adjustments. But in the between custodians and division property administrators through surplus sales and into the property management office, all organizations get involved in the disposal action. Property management is a multifaceted activity. It's a collective effort. No property management organization does it alone. All organizations that get involved in property management make a direct contribution to the effectiveness and efficiency of the system. Think about it for a minute. When we have, on our records alone, contract number, manufacturer, model, description, we have buildings and room numbers, we have users by name, serial numbers of assets. The only thing the property management has directly involved with the asset record is your property ID number, or if you are if you are dealing with IUID, you also now have the IUID record. But the ID numbers is the one thing the property contributes to your asset management record that ties all this other information together. All that other information we need to get from other organizations, and there, as Yvonne mentioned, is the awareness factor. These organizations need to be aware, need to understand that they have a direct contribution to the efficiency and effectiveness of a successful property management system. We share processes between organizations, such as acquisition. We integrate a lot of our data between other organizations. But we also at the same time have separation of duties. Property personnel, compliance, system technology, risk management, logistics, all organizations participate in all of these things in a property management system. Accountability. Property management doesn't do it alone, especially in the area of assets used for contract performance. Organizations, users, when we say, well, let me back up. A property control system. Show of hands. How many people have a property control system? 1, 2, 3. Let me offer you this. It's a property management system. It's not a property control system. There's no such thing as controlling property unless you arc weld, crazy glue, or duct tape. Users. End users are the ones that actually control the property. But they need to have an understanding of accountability and their responsibility to the customer, to the company, to the project, to the contract for maintaining that property. The understanding of accountability must be fostered. I would not suggest it be forced. That's not really the world we want to live in. There need to be clear roles for leadership and individual ownership. Sense of ownership for team results. It's a non-punitive environment. Always open for improvement. Performance evaluation. There's always room for improvement in performance. And most importantly, integrity. We have a unique language in property. We have our own abbreviations and acronyms as if we didn't already have enough. We've got all of these and then some. And outside of property management, there are other abbreviations and acronyms that we must deal with. It is the language of property. We would like to advertise this language, advertise this thing called property management, market it. Let other organizations know what it means in our terms, in our language, and at the same time understand theirs and their organization and their operations. We have a valuable skill base. It's unique to property management. We have resources. NPMA is just one. Peers and colleagues, networking, absolutely. Technical understanding. This thing called property management has requirements behind it. We need those requirements are sometimes subject to change or in constant change. We need to understand from a technical perspective what those requirements are. Being an effective communicator. Being able to discuss property management in terms that other organizations and other individuals will understand, and to negotiate. We also have to have an analytical capability. I like to say it's what's wrong with this picture. Sometimes something goes wrong, something doesn't work right, something is missing, some process didn't actually produce the desired outcome. We take a step back and take a look at the process in its entirety or in one particular area or scope from an analytical perspective. We also need tact and diplomacy. We need to participate, contribute, and lead. Be the expert. Take the time to understand what property management and the requirements are, and at the same time understand how those requirements and how the processes affect other organizations, so that when other organizations come to us for advice and counsel, we have the response, we have the answer. And if we don't have the response and we don't have the answer, what are we going to do? We're going to say, I'm not sure, I'll find out.